In the hour before my grandfather's memorial service, as my family was milling about the sanctuary of First Unitarian Church of Rochester, I was inevitably going into full-blown intern minister mode. I really can't help it. Really scurrying more so than milling, personally. Testing the microphone, commissioning my girlfriend to hand out hymnals, and recruiting cousins, none of whom were raised UU like myself, recruiting cousins to light the chalice at the beginning of the service. I asked my youngest cousin first. "Sure, yeah, probably," she replied. "What does the chalice mean?" That is the right question to ask, for the record, when invited to perform a ritual you're unfamiliar with. Right, yeah, so the flaming chalice actually started as a 2D symbol, like our logo. These Unitarians in Europe, it's actually kind of punk. These Unitarians in Europe, they needed something official looking to stamp on papers that they were giving people to help them escape the Nazis. And then at some point it became this 3D chalice that we actually set on fire. There's a ton of symbolism you can attach to like fire, a chalice cup, the act of lighting a flame or extinguishing it. And UUs have written about all of it, but no one is a singular authority on what the chalice means. There's no one official meaning. The clock was ticking, and so Tara got the short answer. What you all are getting today, because you've indulged me with the pulpit, is the answer I'd have liked to give. As many of you know, I grew up a UU kid in the early 2000s. As a kid, to me, the flaming chalice meant the coveted role of lighting the chalice for your religious education class on a particular Sunday. What kid doesn't love playing with fire? And it meant knowing "This Little Light of Mine" like it was the theme song for a cartoon on PBS. As a youth, as a teenager, taken with the uniquely sensory, circular, peer-led worship of youth conferences, the chalice took on a more spiritual meaning for me. A typical evening worship service at those conferences included spiraling into a dark chapel, all singing a simple round, different bars of the melody naturally overlapping as the long line of teenagers twisted around, weaved, and passed. We sat in a circle, all facing the chalice. Candlelight danced on the walls. The way that this simple space and this crowd of all weekend boisterous, irreverent teens was transformed with just a few tea lights and some unspoken promise we held together. It was as if the ordinary were held suspended. When worship concluded, the chalice would remain lit and the worship space remain open for anyone who wanted to linger. I was usually among those who hung back, lying on our bellies, head propped up on elbows, beholding the chalice flame and whatever magic we had just performed. Having grown up UU in the early 2000s, it's difficult for me to imagine Unitarian Universalist worship without chalice lighting. Just as it's difficult for me to imagine a time when Unitarian Universalism did not exist as one unified identity and entity. But both of these are pretty recent innovations. My dad has this Unitarian Universalist hymnal, Hymns for the Celebration of Life, published in 1964. I was talking with my parents about this topic on the phone, and I got him to dust this off. So this hymnal in 1964 was published just 3 years after the Unitarian and Universalist denominations came together. The hymnal includes 12 selected openings intended to be read in unison, and this was the source of our chalice lighting words today. But the 1964 hymnal makes no mention of chalices or chalice lightings because no one was doing that in 1964. Chalice lighting and extinguishing as a ritual to frame UU services gained widespread adoption only in the early 80s. In fact, its adoption was so organic and unorganized that we have no clear record of who started it or how the practice went from liturgical innovation to inextricable from UU identity. One theory promoted by UU historian and minister Susan Ritchie is that chalice lighting actually began with our youth, with our children in our religious education classrooms. Not long after the merger of Unitarianism and Universalism, the flaming chalice design was the established two-dimensional symbol for our faith. A popular Sunday school curricula of the late 70s included chalice crafts. Our children crafted many of the first three-dimensional representations of our chalice. And while there's no limit to the materials and creative techniques that you could apply to the crafting of your own chalice, I am going to teach you all the trick to the most ubiquitous chalice craft I grew up with. So we have step one, okay. Ta-da! And then step three is decorate with paint, markers, glitter, rhinestones, anything you can get to stick with Elmer's glue. With real 3D chalices in hand, the next obvious step was to introduce fire. Not actually gonna light that, but it very quickly becomes a fully functional chalice, and why not add real fire? And youth Sundays, like the one that we held last month, where the youth lead the service, may have been the bridge between this innovation being adopted in Sunday school classrooms and it becoming a ritual adopted by the whole congregation. Our first documented use of chalice lighting in worship services is from Youth Sundays. Another theory suggested by UU ministers Sherry Woodbury and Dan Harper suggests that the experimental Charles Street Universalist Meeting House could have been where chalice lighting started. The minister of this congregation, the innovative Reverend Kenneth Patton, described features unique to their meeting house in the 1950s. Quote, "On the bookcase is a lamp made from Greek and Roman design, which is the symbol of light, life, wisdom, the hearth, the home, and aspiration. The lamp is lighted at the beginning of the service and snuffed at its close." End quote. In any case, regardless of who started it, the fact that we have no record of how chalice lighting spread speaks to how this ritual was popularized and adopted by congregations in an organic manner. The innovation of chalice lighting was contagious because it filled a commonly felt gap. It filled a need, and so people picked it up when they saw it and heard about it. It answered a common need. Only in 1961 had the Unitarians and Universalists come together, but even before the merger, both denominations were in a state of reinvention. Having outgrown their namesake Christian theologies, Unitarians and Universalists by the mid-20th century were no longer a subgenre of Christianity, but something entirely new. We needed new common rituals for our new theologically diverse identity. There was also maybe a commonly felt need for more spiritual, sensory elements of worship. Unitarian and Universalist worship placed emphasis on the sermon, words, the world of ideas. Norbert Chopek, who created the flower celebration, which we celebrated here just 2 weeks ago, Chopek invented the flower celebration in response to a spiritual need expressed by his congregation. Likewise, chalice lighting was a new, uniquely UU liturgy that resonated widely. By the turn of the century, chalice lighting had secured its place in nearly every UU congregation. The two-dimensional, paper symbol of the flaming chalice had effectively gone up in flames. The symbolic image had become a living, dancing, elemental, performed tradition. But before the flaming chalice was something we acted out in services. The original pen and ink flaming chalice was itself born out of service and action. The year is 1993. The Nazis have risen to power, creating a refugee crisis in still free and democratic Czechoslovakia, and the world is on the brink of war. It was in this context that Martha and Waitstill Sharp took up the charge of the American Unitarian Association to run the newly established Commission for Service in Czechoslovakia. The Sharps were the 18th minister and wife couple to be approached with this request, and the first to say yes. In February 1993, the couple set sail, leaving their young son and daughter in the care of friends. The American Unitarian Association was galvanized to get involved with refugee relief in Europe, in large part thanks to the Unitarian connection with Czechoslovakia. Remember Norbert Čapek, originator of our flower communion, our flower celebration? Born in a small town in the south of Bohemia in 1870, Čapek, at the age of 18, left the Catholic Church of his youth to become a Baptist minister. Always the free thinker, Čapek was soon taking heat for his ideas on politics and religion. In 1914, he and his family fled to the US, where he settled in New Jersey. Shout out New Jersey. During his time in New Jersey, Čapek was widowed and remarried, left the Baptist Church, and began attending a Unitarian congregation. Čapek and his second wife, Maya, a fellow Czech expat, decided to return to their homeland to establish a Unitarian church. The couple's new liberal religious fellowship in Prague grew rapidly. By 1938, the year that Sudetenland was sacrificed to Germany in an ill-fated attempt at appeasement, the Czech Unitarian Fellowship had grown to 3,500 members. Personal ties to Prague through Čapek now made it impossible for the Unitarians to ignore the foreign crisis. The American Unitarian Association raised $41,000, which is close to $1 million in today's money, and dispatched Martha and Waitstill Sharp. Arriving in Prague, the couple were met by Norbert at the train station, and during their year in Prague, attended services at Unitaria, their congregation. In addition to allocating relief funds to feed and house refugees, evacuating Jewish and anti-Nazi intellectuals quickly became a top priority. In March 1939, 1 month after Martha and Waitstill's arrival, the German occupation of Czechoslovakia commenced. Martha and Waitstill worked to secure foreign job placements and exit visas for individuals whose political records and democratic ideas put a target on their backs. Martha took the lead on direct rescue efforts, and Waitstill undertook a high-risk and highly illegal currency exchange operation to fund their efforts. On August 15th of that year, Martha fled Prague, having received a tip from a friend. And not a day too soon, the very next day, the Gestapo had come to arrest her. As Martha and Waitstill crossed the Atlantic homeward bound, Germany invaded Poland. Norbert Čapek, in spite of invitations to return stateside, chose to remain with his congregation. He would be arrested 2 years later and die in a concentration camp. Before his death, Čapek held a flower celebration with his fellow prisoners. In November 1939, the Unitarian Service Committee was formally established, and the Sharps were asked to lead its field operations in Europe. This time, the Sharps set up their office in Lisbon, Portugal. In September, Reverend Charles Joy joined the Sharps in Lisbon, and Joy then took over direction of the office when the Sharps returned to the States. Paperwork at that time was a common impediment to border crossing, as it is today. An important function of the Unitarian Service Committee was assisting refugees in securing the required documents, perhaps replacement documents for papers left at home in the rush of escape, from various agencies. Well, Joy had the idea to go one step further and begin issuing papers themselves. It may amuse you a bit, Joy reported to Boston, to know that we are now issuing Navicerts to pass emigrants to the New World through the British blockade. We are certifying that they are politically safe and sound. The Unitarian Service Committee needed a good-looking seal, to give their papers that air of authority and credibility. And here enters our flaming chalice. The seal was designed by Hans Deutsch, an Austrian refugee then working in the Lisbon office with Charles Joy. Deutsch, an artist and musician, had been living in Paris and publishing political cartoons critical of Hitler prior to Nazi invasion. We do not have a record of Deutsch's own interpretation of his design, but we do have this description from Charles Joy in a report to Boston. It represents, as you see, a chalice with a flame, the kind of chalice which the Greeks and Romans put on their altars. The holy oil burning in it is a symbol of helpfulness and sacrifice. In ancient and medieval art, this chalice is frequently found, and the design itself, modernized and stylized though it is, reminds one of the signs seen on the old monastic manuscripts. This was in the mind of the artist. The fact, however, that it remotely suggests a cross was not in his mind, but to me also has its merit. We do not limit our work to Christians. Indeed, at the present moment, our work is 9/10 for the Jews, yet we do stem from the Christian tradition, and the cross does symbolize Christianity and its central theme of sacrificial love. Joy was careful in his letter to defer to the committees in Boston, to the committee's authority, assuring them that the symbol was only meant to be temporary until the committee had the opportunity to give input. Nevertheless, Joy adds, personally, I like it very much. It is simple, chaste, and distinctive. I think it might well become the sign of our work everywhere. The flaming chalice did indeed become a sign of Unitarian service everywhere, adopted first by the Unitarian Service Committee, then by the larger Unitarian denomination, and eventually by the Unitarian Universalists everywhere. Our chalice, the symbol of our faith, has always been first and foremost about action, about service. It is a living symbol for a living tradition, born not out of lofty creeds or immutable ideals, but out of necessity. Designed by an anti-Hitler cartoonist, a self-proclaimed godless fellow, sketched in spare moments in the midst of his work aiding fellow refugees. The thing about chalice lighting is it's not one and done. Ours is not an eternal flame. Our faith is not confessed, but recommitted to, acted out, as best we can, again and again. Listen, I love a good metaphor, and the chalice is just saturated with metaphors. But what I most often need from my UU community is the persistent challenge to live my faith, with my body, with my time, with my choices. Action precedes theology in this church, meaning we discover what we believe the moment we sit down to paint our protest signs, that we pluck a weed flower from the dirt of a prison camp, that we open our mouths to sing. As the threat of fascism rises in our own country, we are called to resist in a million difficult and beautiful ways. Whatever it is that we do with this moment, that is what our chalice means. In the words of our artist, Hans Deutsch, if your kind of life is a profession of your faith, then religion, ceasing to be magic and mysticism, becomes active, really useful social work, to which even a godless fellow like myself can say wholeheartedly, yes. I invite you to rise in body or in spirit for hymn number 128, For All That Is Our Life.